The evening had been unusually peaceful. I had just finished a long shift and settled into my small rental apartment 3 states away, relieved to finally have a moment of quiet. I'd kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and poured myself a cup of instant coffee that tasted like burnt regret, but felt like comfort anyway. I was halfway through the mug when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it, probably a work notification or a group chat I hadn't responded to in weeks. But something pushed me to look. It was a message from my elderly neighbor back home, Mrs. Dalka. "Sweetheart, I saw your parents and your sister carrying boxes into your house. Do you need help? Just making sure everything is all right." My heart gave a strange lurch. Boxes, my parents, in my house. Nothing about the message made sense. My parents rarely visited without calling ahead, and my sister, Marisa. She practically treated my place like it didn't exist, unless she needed something. A pit formed in my stomach. With shaky hands, I opened the home security camera app. The loading screen spun endlessly, like it knew the truth waiting on the other end would hurt. When it finally connected, I nearly dropped my phone. There, in fully HD clarity, were my parents in my living room, with Marissa's suitcases. My mother brushed dust off her knees as she straightened up from dropping a large plastic tote. My father carried 2 giant duffel bags, breathing hard but moving with purpose. And Marissa, dressed in her usual overly expensive athleisure outfit, strutted in behind them like she was arriving at a 5-star resort. They weren't visiting, they were moving in. I blinked hard, thinking maybe this was some bizarre misunderstanding. But then I turned up the audio. "Put that over there," Mom said, pointing to the entryway. "She'll need space for her clothes." Space, my pulse quickened. Dad exhaled loudly. "This'll be good for her. She needs a stable place to stay." Stable. She had an apartment, a good one, last I checked. Marissa tossed her hair back, rolling her eyes. "Finally, I get a real home for a while. Liam won't mind. He owes me after everything." Owes her. For what? For existing. The betrayal hit me like a physical punch. My house was the one thing I had earned without shortcuts, without help, without being overshadowed by Marissa's constant drama. I had worked overtime for months, skipped vacations, saved every penny to buy that place. It was the first thing in my life that was truly mine. And they were treating it like an inheritance they could distribute at their convenience. I watched in silent horror as my mother walked into the guest room, my home office, and peeled the sheets off the bed, replacing them with new floral ones I'd never seen before. She set Marissa's pillows down, smoothing them with a satisfied pat. My father carried in a box labeled "Makeup plus Vanity" and placed it gently on the floor. Every second felt like a slap. Then came the conversation that changed everything. "Mom, he won't care. He's too soft to say no. Dad, he barely comes home anyway." "Marissa, yeah, he'll get over it. He always does." My chest tightened painfully. I felt like I couldn't breathe. So that was how they saw me, someone whose boundaries didn't matter, someone they could walk over for the greater good, someone who would swallow betrayal with a forced smile. I sat there in my dim apartment, listening to them rearrange my life without me, and something cold settled inside me. Not rage, not sadness, clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to stay quiet. They had no idea I was watching, but soon they would. For what felt like hours, I sat glued to my phone, silently observing the unfolding chaos in my own home. The scene was surreal. My parents moving my sister into a space that wasn't hers. My possessions being shuffled around as if they belonged to someone else. Every little detail burned in my chest. I watched Marissa carefully arrange her things on my desk, the desk where I had spent countless nights writing, planning, and dreaming. My notebooks, half-filled journals, sketchpads I'd never shared with anyone, they were shoved aside like disposable clutter. The realization that she was literally occupying the space I had carved out for myself made bile rise in my throat. Mom walked around, seemingly oblivious to the damage she was causing. She folded my extra blankets and put them neatly in a corner. "She'll need a cozy spot," she said casually, her voice calm and sweet, like she wasn't betraying me but doing some great favor. Dad, meanwhile, tried to help Marisa unpack, moving boxes and arranging her clothes. He smiled at her like he had never noticed the tension, like he hadn't just signed off on the plan to erase my space. Marisa, of course, acted like this was all perfectly normal. At one point, she paused in front of my full-length mirror and snapped a selfie. "Finally, a real house," she said, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction. I knew Liam would give in eventually. That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was betrayal, the kind that cuts deeper than words can describe. My own family, the people I had trusted the most, had decided they could manipulate me without my knowledge. They weren't just visiting, they were taking over. Every subtle look, every quiet movement, was a reminder that I had been completely excluded from a decision that directly affected my life. And then came the clincher. I heard my mother whisper to my father, "If he complains, we'll talk him into it. You know he'll fold." That sentence hit harder than a punch. I had spent my entire life being the soft one, the one who would forgive, the one who would understand. But this time, they weren't testing my patience, they were exploiting it. They believed I wouldn't stand up for myself, that I'd silently let them invade my home, my sanctuary, and my life. The quiet, simmering anger in me began to crystallize into something sharper, something more deliberate. I realized this wasn't just a moment of familial carelessness, it was premeditated. They had planned this behind my back, counting on my absence to carry out a scheme they assumed I would never notice. I couldn't stay silent, but I also knew confrontation in the heat of the moment would only play into their narrative, that I was emotional, unreasonable, incapable of control. No, I needed patience, strategy, precision. I leaned back in my chair, my phone trembling slightly in my hands. My mind raced with possibilities. I could call them and yell, but that would give them the power to twist the story. I could ignore it, but that would allow them to win. Then the thought came, cold and deliberate. I'll let them act as if they've won. I'll let them feel safe in their assumption that I'm blind and soft, and then I'll reclaim what is mine, completely, decisively, in a way they will never forget. Watching them now, oblivious to my awareness, I realized I had the advantage. They thought they were executing a master plan. In reality, I was the one in control. And that night, as Marisa unpacked another box of clothes and my parents chatted casually about their helpful intentions, I felt the first spark of sweet, silent revenge ignite. I wasn't just hurt, I wasn't just betrayed. I was awake, and I was ready. I booked the earliest flight I could find, my mind racing with both anticipation and a strange, focused calm. No calls, no warnings. If they thought they could walk into my life unannounced, I would return the favor, on my terms. The whole flight, I stared out the window at the clouds, letting the adrenaline simmer under a calm exterior. By the time the plane touched down, my plan was clear. I was going to reclaim my house, my space, and my dignity without losing my temper. The drive home was quiet. The familiar streets of my neighborhood rolled by, each stoplight and sidewalk familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. This wasn't just about Marisa or my parents anymore. It was about control, boundaries, and respect. They had assumed I was soft, invisible, predictable. I intended to prove them wrong. I parked a block away and stayed in the car for a moment, taking stock of the house I had fought so hard to make mine. I pulled out my phone and accessed the smart home app I had installed months ago, not for situations like this, but moments like this. Step 1, Wi-Fi and smart locks. I changed the password, Every phone, every device, every key that relied on it was instantly disconnected. Step 2. Codes and permissions. My parents' digital entry codes vanished with a few taps. The spare key hidden under the mat. Gone every way in, every loophole, every assumed advantage, they had vanished in seconds. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn, the house glowing warmly in the fading light, but it was my glow now, not theirs. 15 minutes later, like clockwork, I saw them pull up the driveway. Marisa carried a grocery bag in one hand, her designer sneakers crunching the gravel. My parents followed with more bags, chatting casually as if they owned the place. Dad approached the door first. He punched in the code, beep, denied. He tried again and again. Mom frowned. Marisa groaned dramatically, tossing her bag to the ground. They exchanged frustrated glances. I stepped out slowly, keeping my hands in my pockets, trying to appear calm and collected. "Problem?" I asked, my voice quiet but steady. Shock hit them immediately. My mother froze, eyes wide. My father's jaw tightened. Marissa's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Liam, you're home early." Mom stammered, the usual confident tone gone. "Yeah," I said evenly. "Funny thing, I came home to find out I apparently have a new roommate." Marissa rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, it's not a big deal." I cut her off, voice low but sharp. "It is a big deal. I watch my own family move someone into my home behind my back. I watch them treat my life like it doesn't matter, and now you." I gestured at Marissa, are acting like it's normal, like it's deserved. My dad opened his mouth, probably to argue, but I shook my head. "No, you all made a choice. You planned this. You assumed I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't care. You underestimated me." Mom's lips trembled. We didn't think you didn't think." I repeated, my voice colder now. "You walked into my house, moved her in, and assumed my silence was permission. That's not thinking, that's betrayal." Marissa looked ready to scream, but I held her gaze. "You're leaving tonight. Every single bag goes back to where it came from, and none of you will have access to this house without my permission ever again." I turned the key in my pocket, my only key, just enough to remind them who controlled the locks now. They didn't protest. Not really. They just started moving, faces pale, voices quiet, and that's when I realized something important. For once, I wasn't the powerless one. For the first time, I wasn't being pushed around. For the first time, I was seen, and the world, my world, was mine to protect. And for the first time in my life, revenge didn't feel bitter. It felt like justice. The house was quiet again, but it felt different, like the air itself had shifted. I watched from the living room as my parents and Marisa finished packing up the last of her things. Not a word was spoken. The once bustling energy of their invasion had vanished, replaced by an awkward, tense silence that seemed to echo through the empty rooms. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, observing their every move. My mother kept glancing at me, eyes wide and brimming with guilt. My father's shoulders slumped, the weight of realization heavy on him. And Marissa, well, she looked stunned, defeated, like a queen dethroned in her own imaginary kingdom. "You're all leaving," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "And none of you will have access to my home again. Not now, not ever, without my explicit permission." Mom's voice trembled. "Liam, we didn't mean you did." I interrupted softly but pointedly. "You meant every part of it, every step, every box, every smug look. You all planned this behind my back. You betrayed me." Dad opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For once, there were no excuses, no justifications. Only silence, heavy and uncomfortable. Marisa muttered something under her breath, probably a complaint about having to pack her things again, but she avoided my gaze. Not today, she had nothing to defend herself with. As they loaded the last box into the car, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The adrenaline that had powered me through my return was fading, leaving behind clarity and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. When the car finally pulled away, I locked the door behind them, turned off the lights, and sank onto the couch. The house, my house, felt alive in a new way, quiet, yes, but full of intention and presence. It was no longer a place where I was invisible or powerless. It was mine, protected by the boundaries I had finally enforced. In the following days, my parents called repeatedly, offering apologies that were more heartfelt than I had ever heard. They admitted the truth. They had underestimated me, ignored my feelings, and assumed I would always be the soft one who let others take over. I listened, sometimes responding, sometimes remaining silent. Forgiveness was possible, but only on my terms and only at my pace. Marissa, predictably, tried to text and call. I ignored her for the first week. Each ignored message felt like a stitch closing a wound that had been open for far too long. Eventually, she stopped. She realized she had no leverage over me, no way to manipulate my emotions, and no space to claim in my life. The process of healing was gradual. I spent long evenings in my home, rearranging the furniture, moving things back into their rightful places, and reclaiming spaces I hadn't realized I'd lost. Every object returned, every book reshelved, felt like a small victory. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was about the emotional territory, the part of me that had been pushed aside, ignored, and taken for granted for years. I learned something profound in those quiet moments. Standing up for yourself isn't just about confrontation. It's about recognizing your own worth, defending your boundaries, and protecting the spaces, physical and emotional, that define who you are. Weeks later, when my parents visited again, the atmosphere was different. There were apologies, nods, and tentative conversations. The trust we had lost was being rebuilt, but slowly, carefully, on terms that respected my autonomy. And Marissa, she never set foot in my house again, not because I blocked her entirely, but because she finally understood she could no longer control me, manipulate me, or assume I would let her in. She had lost her leverage, and I had found my strength. As I sat in the quiet of my living room one evening, I realized the truth I had spent years searching for. I had my voice. I had my power, I had my home, and I had finally learned that sometimes the sweetest victories aren't loud or vengeful. They're quiet, firm, and undeniably yours. For the first time, the house felt like more than a building. It was a sanctuary, a safe place, a symbol of boundaries respected and strength reclaimed. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, irrevocably at peace.